Late autumn, midweek, the kind of week where the daylight thins out early and the world starts packing itself away by 5. I was in my late 30s then, on the road for routine work, inspection photos, equipment checks, paperwork that had to match what existed on the ground. I'm the methodical type. I track mileage. I plan fuel. I like predictable stops and clean receipts. That afternoon, the route pulled me off a secondary highway toward a mill town that looked like it had exhaled and never bothered to inhale again. Shuttered storefronts, a silent school, a water tower with peeling paint, and an old name you couldn't quite read at speed. My coffee had gone lukewarm in the cup holder, and the heater in my car kept clicking like it couldn't decide if it was working. If you like these quiet, real-style accounts, subscribe. I'll share more of them as they happened. Out there, the last functioning gas station showed up like a small island of light in a place that had already started turning itself off for the night. I didn't stop because I was curious. I stopped because my fuel gauge had dropped into the range where optimism turns into math. My GPS showed a long stretch ahead with nothing, no services, no exits that promised anything beyond dark trees and fading road lines. The station sat just off the road with an old canopy and 2 pumps that looked like they'd been there since the town still had traffic worth naming. The attached office was a low rectangle with a small door, a window, and a dim light buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. I told myself it would be quick. Fill the tank, use the restroom, grab a bottle of water if they had one, get back on the road while there was still a clean edge between evening and night. The place made sense in a historical way, like a leftover organ in a body that had lost the rest of its limbs. Even so, something about it felt open more out of habit than necessity. No cars, no voices, no music from inside, just wind and a faint hum from the highway behind me, distant enough to sound like it belonged to someone else's life. When I started fueling, the pump display lagged, numbers crawling forward, then pausing, then catching up as if the station had to think about whether it wanted to count. The nozzle handle felt loose, worn smooth by decades of hands. I watched the total climb and listened to the thin mechanical chatter inside the pump housing, a tired rhythm that never quite settled. The strangest part wasn't one thing. It was the little mismatches layered together. Through the office window, a receipt printer whirred and spit out paper in short bursts even though I hadn't stepped inside. A security camera above the door moved in a slow pan, but it never quite centered on me. Always a few feet behind, like a lazy eye tracking something that had already passed. The interior lights flickered at irregular intervals, not the normal flicker of cheap bulbs, but a brief dimming like a heartbeat skipping. I did what I always do in places like that. I rationalized. Old wiring, aging equipment, an underfunded business keeping itself alive with duct tape and stubbornness. Still, the station didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like something running on inertia, machines doing what they'd been told to do for so long that nobody had to be there anymore. I walked toward the office while the pump continued to work. The concrete under the canopy was stained with old spills and tire marks, layered like rings in a tree. The smell was gasoline, yes, but also oil, and under that something metallic like pennies held too long in a warm hand. Inside, the shelves were stocked, technically. Bottled water, chips, a few canned goods, rows of motor oil. But everything had a soft film of dust, the kind that settles evenly when nothing is disturbed. It didn't look shopped. It looked staged, like a memory of a store, arranged for someone who wasn't actually going to buy anything. A backroom door stood ajar. Beyond it was darkness and a low, steady mechanical sound, too even to be a person, too steady to be wind. Generator, I thought. Or refrigeration. Some old unit that never shuts off because if it does, it won't start again. The sound wasn't loud, but it had presence, like something breathing in the walls. Outside, the canopy hum grew sharper, and the wind picked up. A loose sign, an old metal placard mounted near the corner, tapped the building in a slow, repetitive knock. Knock, pause, knock, like someone testing if the place was still solid. I checked my phone out of reflex. 1 bar, then nothing, then 1 again. No real signal, just the suggestion of one. I looked around for staff, a car, a shadow behind the counter, any movement that said, "Someone is running this." There was nothing. No footsteps. No cough. No radio. Only the pump clicking away behind me and that backroom sound, steady and indifferent. The station sat at the edge of the town's darkness, and beyond it there were no other lights. No porch bulbs, no street lamps, nothing in the distance except the road dissolving into black. That's when the unease arrived. Not a spike of fear, not panic, just a physical awareness that the normal rules had thinned out the way daylight had. I realized how long I'd been alone in that lit space. How my own movements sounded too loud, my shoes on concrete, my jacket shifting, the soft beep of my key fob when I checked that my car was still locked. The camera above the door made another slow sweep, and again it lagged behind my position. It wasn't tracking me in real time. It was following where I had been, like it was learning the route my body took through the space and replaying it a moment late. For a second, the thought came uninvited and very clear. This place might not be abandoned in the usual way. It might be maintained for something else. Not commerce, not customers, something more like a ritual of function. Pumps working, lights on, shelves arranged, because that's what it was built to do, and it hadn't gotten the message that the world had moved on. If you appreciate slow burn, realistic horror, the kind that creeps in quietly, leave a like. The pump clicked, and I turned back toward it. The numbers on the display stuttered, froze, then jumped as if someone had hit fast forward. I reached for the nozzle to stop the flow, and the pump made a hard clunk, locked for a beat, then released. Fuel splashed onto the concrete in a small, sudden spill, bright and sharp-smelling. Instinctively, I stepped back, heart steady but alert, like I'd touched something hot. At the same moment, the backroom sound stopped. Not faded, not wound down, just stopped, like a switch had been thrown. The station lights dimmed, then surged. The flicker inside became a brief steadiness that felt wrong, like a face going blank. In the office window, I caught my own reflection, jacket, hands, the pale oval of my face. Then something moved behind it. Not outside, not a shadow cast by wind. A shape passing through the lit interior space at shoulder height, crossing from left to right. I spun toward the office door, expecting to see a person stepping out, a clerk, anyone. The door didn't move. The window showed only shelves and the counter. But the movement had been real enough that my eyes kept searching for the explanation, the way they do when your brain refuses to accept the first answer it offers. Then the register drawer slid open. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't slam. It eased out with a smooth, practiced motion, paused, then slid shut again. No hands. No footsteps. No voice from the back room. Just that neat, deliberate action, like the station was demonstrating that it could. Above me, the security camera finally stopped panning. It centered on my position under the canopy and held steady. For several seconds it didn't drift, didn't lag. It stared. In that stillness, I felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with a lens and everything to do with intention. Like the station, or whatever was running inside it, had decided I was the only thing worth watching. The wind kept pushing the loose sign into its slow knock. Knock, pause, knock, like a clock marking a time I wasn't supposed to be standing in. I cut the pump. I didn't bother trying to make the spill neat. I didn't step into the office. I didn't look again at the backroom door. I moved the way I move when something doesn't fit and the cost of investigating might be high. Controlled, quick, and without giving my body the chance to argue. I got into my car, shut the door, and sat for half a second with my hands on the wheel listening. No footsteps outside. No knock on the glass. No voice calling out that I'd forgotten to pay. The only sound was my own breathing and the faint tick of the engine cooling and warming as it decided what it needed to do. I started the car. The headlights cut across the lot, catching the edges of the pumps and the stained concrete. I backed out smoothly, not peeling away, not doing anything that would make a mistake easier. As I pulled onto the road, I checked my mirrors. The station's lights were steady now. Perfectly steady. No flicker. No dimming. The canopy hummed the way it probably had for decades, a consistent tone that faded as I gained distance. It looked, in the mirror, exactly like what it was pretending to be, a normal place to stop. The road ahead felt longer than it had a few minutes earlier. The darkness felt thicker, as if the headlights weren't pushing it back so much as carving a narrow tunnel through it. I glanced at the fuel gauge once, then again, half expecting it to dip back toward empty like the whole stop had been a glitch in my mind. It held. I didn't relax until I'd been driving for a while, long enough that the town was behind me and the highway hum returned to a familiar background. Habit made me keep the receipt when I eventually found another station and paid for a coffee to settle my hands. Later, in a motel room with flat lighting and clean sheets, I unfolded the paper and studied it the way I study inspection reports, looking for the part that explains the part that doesn't make sense. The timestamp was off by hours, not a simple wrong time zone, kind of off. The printed time suggested I'd been there at a point in the day when I was still on an entirely different road, according to my own logs. The location code on the receipt, small numbers near the bottom, matched a station name I couldn't remember seeing on the building. When I searched it out of stubbornness, the records that came up were inconsistent. The clearest thing I found was an old listing stating the place had closed years earlier. Another entry mentioned demolition. A third showed a photo of an overgrown lot. I pulled up a satellite image. In the most recent view available, there was no canopy, just bare concrete and weeds, like the land had been trying to erase the outline of where people used to stop. Yet I could still hear, in my mind, that loose sign tapping the building, and I could still see the interior shelves. Not stocked for sale, but arranged for display, like a set dressed for a scene that hadn't been filmed in a long time. I've been in plenty of declining places. Towns don't die all at once. They thin out. They hollow. They leave behind structures that keep their shape long after their purpose is gone. But that station didn't feel merely left behind. It felt like it persisted in a partial state, repeating a function because repetition was all it had left. Sometimes I wonder if it was simply faulty equipment and a tired mind connecting dots that weren't there. But I can't get past the timing of it, the way the backroom sound stopped when the fuel spilled, the way the register moved like a demonstration, the way the camera finally centered and held. Not malfunction, not random, a sequence. I don't tell this story as a claim about ghosts or curses. I tell it as a warning about boundaries. That last gas station in that dying town felt like the final point of light before a stretch of road that leads somewhere it shouldn't. And for a few minutes, it felt like the place noticed me noticing it. If this account stayed with you, share it with someone who prefers grounded horror, and subscribe. There's another story after this one, and it isn't any easier to forget. Early winter always makes neighborhoods look more disciplined than they really are. The lawns go dull, the trees go skeletal, and every sound carries farther. Trash lids closing, car doors, the scrape of a shovel on a sidewalk. Back then I was in my mid-30s, working field inspections for property assessment and insurance files. Most of my days were the same. Photograph elevations, note foundation cracks, document storm damage, verify that what's on paper still exists in wood and stone. I liked the routine. It kept things honest. There's comfort in measurements, in dates, in pictures that don't care what you feel about them. If you prefer these quiet, real-style accounts, subscribe. I keep them as plainly as I can. The town was a 1960s build. Tidy subdivisions, cul-de-sacs shaped like commas, matching mailboxes and porch railings that had been painted and repainted until they looked sealed. People waved because they recognized a clipboard and assumed you were there for something reasonable. Most homes had signs of life even in winter. Cars parked at angles, curtains shifted, a dog barking from somewhere warm. But there was one house at the end of a cul-de-sac that never looked lived in. Not abandoned exactly, just dark. Always dark. No cars, no footprints in the snow that lasted, no holiday lights, no packages. And yet the yard stayed neat, as if somebody cared enough to keep it from becoming a question. The first time I photographed it, it was just another address. The second time, it was a curiosity. The third time, it became a problem. The assignment came through with a clean title, Resurvey Exterior, Verify Condition, Update File. Nothing that should have stood out. But when I opened the ownership history, I saw the same property had been sold 3 times in 5 years under slightly different names and holding entities. Short-term sales. Traversals. A pattern of filings that looked like people trying to pass a hot stone from hand to hand without admitting it burned. What bothered me wasn't the turnover. That happens. What bothered me was the vacancy record. No occupancy permits on file, no rental registration, no utility confirmations beyond a minimal service baseline. On paper, it was a house that belonged to someone but was never inhabited by anyone. And yet it remained insured, valued, assessed like normal. It sat in the system like an unanswered email you keep marking as read because you don't want to deal with it. My task was simple: exterior photos from all sides, condition notes, confirmation of any visible damage. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need access. I didn't need permission to record what anyone could see from the street. Still, as I drove toward that cul-de-sac again, I felt the mild, professional curiosity that comes when paperwork doesn't match reality. Usually there's a mundane explanation: management company, estate dispute, renovation delay. The kind of thing that wastes time, but never keeps you up. The first irregularity was the lawn. It was early winter. The grass was pale and brittle, the sort that crunches under boots. But the yard looked freshly cut, edges trimmed, leaves cleared, the whole thing neat in a way that didn't match the season. The trash bin had been rolled back from the curb and set beside the garage as if someone had done it the morning after pickup. The driveway, though, stayed empty. No tire marks, no oil stains, no chalk drawings, just bare concrete and a closed door. I checked the utility meters on the side of the house from the sidewalk line, where I could see them. The readings were nearly static compared to my last record. Minimal usage, consistent with a service line that's on, but not used. It didn't add up with the maintenance. People don't mow a lawn in freezing air and never turn on a light. Then, right at dusk, the front porch light came on. Not a floodlight, not a motion sensor burst. A steady porch bulb, warm and normal, like a family inside had decided the day was over. I looked around for a sensor, nothing obvious. No little lens on the soffit. No wired unit above the door. It came on as if by timer. That on its own meant nothing. Plenty of owners keep timers. Plenty of management companies pay someone to walk the grounds. I told myself the simplest story. A property management service was keeping the place presentable for sale. That was the practical answer. But the porch light felt less like a convenience and more like a signal, an act performed on schedule. The house was well kept in the same way a staged home is well kept. The paint was intact. The gutters were clean. The windows were washed, though not perfectly. There were faint dust arcs along the edges, as if the glass had been wiped long ago and then left untouched. When I got closer, the cold air carried a faint smell that didn't belong outside. Cleaning chemicals, something sharp and sterile, like ammonia cut with citrus. It wasn't strong, just present enough to make me notice it when I exhaled. I took my standard photos, front elevation, roofline, eaves, foundation exposure. Through the front windows, I caught reflections that made me pause. I'd reviewed interior layout records before, out of habit. Typical 60s split-level plan, living room on the left, dining area behind, staircase visible from the entry. But in the glass, the angles didn't match what the records suggested. The reflections were subtle. Where a wall should have been, the space looked deeper. Where a hallway should have opened, it looked blocked. It could have been remodel work, sure, but there were no permits on file. No contractor trucks. No debris. At one window, a blind sat slightly open, a thin gap that let me see just enough to make my eyes work too hard. Inside, there were silhouettes of furniture, an upright chair, a low table, maybe a lamp. Arranged with intention. Yet the dust patterns on the glass suggested years of stillness. No fingerprints. No smudges near the latch. No fogging from breath, no sign of warmth inside. The porch light glowed, but the house behind it remained black. I started asking around in the soft way you do when you don't want to sound like you're gossiping. Neighbors were outside sometimes, pulling in bins, turning on sprinklers before the freeze, sweeping stoops. When I mentioned the house casually, I'm updating files at the end of the street. Their responses were polite and brief. A nod, a small smile, then a change of subject. One man offered me directions to a different address I hadn't asked about. A woman asked if I needed help finding the highway. They weren't hostile. They were practiced. The way people get when they've learned there's no reward for saying more. That night, from the street, I heard a low mechanical sound coming from inside the house. Not loud enough to be a generator, not rhythmic enough to be a refrigerator. More like an HVAC cycle, the deep, distant hum of a system moving air through ducts. It came on, ran steadily, then clicked off. It happened again a few minutes later. But the utility logs, what I had access to, showed no meaningful power draw over time. Just that flat, minimal baseline. It felt like the house was producing the sound, because that's what houses do at night. Not because someone needed heat. Before I went back the next day, I remember thinking, calmly, practically, that I was probably looking at a bookkeeping issue. A meter malfunction. A management company with cash and a routine. If you're the kind of listener who enjoys this slow, realistic build, a like helps me know to share more of it. The realization didn't arrive as a dramatic thought. It arrived as a shift in how I looked at the place. I'd been treating it like a property that happened to be vacant. But what I was seeing suggested something else. The house was being maintained to look lived in, not to be lived in. Every signal was outward facing. Lawn trimmed where neighbors would see it. Trash bin moved the way a resident would move it. Porch light timed to the same rhythm as the rest of the street. Inside, there was just enough suggestion of a normal interior to satisfy a glance through glass. But no warmth, no wear, no drift of life. It was like a stage set kept ready for a performance that never started. And in that thought, another one followed, quiet, unwelcome. Maybe the point wasn't to keep people out. Maybe the point was to keep occupancy from happening. As if the house resisted the idea of being owned in the way a home usually is, where someone settles and leaves a mark. I've inspected properties with structural issues, with code violations, with real hazards. This didn't feel like that. This felt like a refusal made to look like normalcy. I returned in the late afternoon, partly because the file demanded a few additional angles, and partly because I wanted closure. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone is inside making dinner, and the day has narrowed down to windows and warm light. I parked at the curb, took my camera, and walked toward the side yard for the photos I hadn't captured cleanly last time. The side of the house had a narrow run between fence and siding. The snow there was thin and patchy, undisturbed. No footprints, no animal tracks. I stayed at a respectful distance, taking photos of the foundation line and the condition of the siding. The porch light was on again, steady. The rest of the house was dark. Then inside, a light came on in a room I hadn't seen lit before. Not the whole house, just one room, a pale rectangle behind a curtain. It stayed on for a moment, then clicked off. A few seconds later, a different room lit up, farther back, as if someone had moved. Then another. The lights shifted room to room in sequence, methodical, paced like footsteps, but without any sound that matched. No floorboards, no muffled voices, no television, just light traveling through the structure like a person walking a familiar route. I stood still, my camera lowered slightly, listening hard enough that my ears felt tense. The neighborhood itself stayed normal. A distant car door closing, a dog barking once and stopping. But from the house, nothing. The sequence continued. Kitchen area, hallway, a brief glow near what I assumed was the staircase. Each illumination lasted just long enough to suggest purpose, and then moved on. I backed away a step, telling myself it was a timer system, smart bulbs on a program designed to imitate occupancy. That's a real thing. People do it to deter break-ins. It was still plausible, still explainable, but it didn't feel like a program. It felt like attention moving. The front door handle turned, slowly, from the inside, not a jiggle from wind, not a rattle of loose hardware, a deliberate rotation, stopping just before the latch released. The porch light glowed steadily over the door, throwing a clean circle of illumination onto the stoop. The handle held in that turned position for a second, like someone had decided not to open it, then eased back to neutral. No footsteps approached the door. No shadow crossed the frosted glass. Nothing else changed. My heart wasn't racing. That's what I remember most. It stayed steady, as if my body was conserving energy for something it didn't want to name. But every muscle in me tightened. I took another step back, then another, keeping my eyes on the door the way you do when you're dealing with an animal you don't want to startle. Inside, one more light flicked on, just for a moment, behind a window facing the side yard. The timing was too perfect, as if whatever routine was running had accounted for where I was standing, as if the house, or whatever operated through it, was following a schedule meant for people who no longer arrived. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I didn't try the door, which is the sort of thing you might imagine doing later, and then be grateful you didn't. I simply retreated along the curb line, reached my car, and got in with the careful speed of someone trying not to turn a quiet situation into a loud one. The moment I shut the door, the interior lights went out. All of them. At once. The porch light remained unwavering. It was like the house had finished its demonstration. I drove away under control, hands steady on the wheel, making the kind of turns that don't attract attention. A few streets over, I pulled to the side and sat for a moment, staring at my own dashboard lights as if they were something I could rely on. My camera was on the passenger seat. I could have checked the photos right then. I didn't. I didn't want to see anything unexpected captured in pixels. Back at my motel and later at the office, I submitted the file with fewer angles than required. I wrote a brief note. Access limited by conditions. Recommend reassignment if further verification needed. I didn't mention lights. I didn't mention the door handle. There are things that sound unreasonable on paper, and once they're typed, they become your problem in a new way. The request for reassignment was accepted without discussion. The report was closed quietly with a final note that felt too neat. Property stable, no action required. Stable. That word stayed with me. Not occupied, not vacant. Stable. as if the priority was to keep it as it was. Over the next months, I checked the records once or twice the way you touch a sore tooth with your tongue, even when you know it won't help. Public filings showed the same pattern repeating. A buyer appears, an LLC, a trust, a private name, then withdraws within days. No completed inspection. No complaints. No lawsuits. No code enforcement visits. Nothing that would mark conflict. The house stayed valued, stayed insured, stayed maintained, taxes paid on time, lawn cut, porch light on at dusk. Neighbors never filed anything, either. No noise complaints, no suspicious activity calls, no trespass reports. It was as if the street had agreed, without speaking, that the house was easiest to live beside if you treated it like weather. You don't argue with it, you adapt. Once, while driving through the town for a different file, I passed near that cul-de-sac again at night. I didn't turn in. I didn't slow down much. But I saw the porch light glowing at the end, a soft dot in the distance. And for a second, I thought I saw an interior light blink on and off behind a window, like the house was still doing its rounds. I've learned that abandonment isn't always empty rooms and broken windows. Sometimes it's the opposite. A place kept pristine, kept ready, kept convincingly normal, so nobody asks what it's for. That house never looked ruined. It never looked unsafe. It looked preserved, maintained in the motions of being lived in, while resisting the actual act of living there. Ownership passed over it like water over stone, never soaking in, never leaving a mark. When people talk about haunted houses, they usually mean something that wants attention, noises, shadows, a spectacle. This didn't feel like that. It felt quieter, administrative, like a property that had been removed from the human part of the world, but left in the system anyway, ticking boxes, turning on lights, keeping the lawn trimmed, turning a door handle just enough to remind you. You can be here, but you won't be staying. Some houses don't become abandoned. They simply stop allowing ownership, continuing the routine of being lived in long after the people are gone. If this story left a mark, share it with someone who prefers grounded horror, and subscribe for the next account. There's always another address on the list. Late summer in a rural county has a particular kind of quiet, one that isn't peaceful so much as efficiently empty. The fields are loud with insects, the tree lines hold their breath, and the heat sits low over the road like a thin sheet of glass. I was in my mid-30s then, working telecom infrastructure audits, verifying signal repeaters, checking pole lines, logging coordinates for weak coverage complaints. It's practical work, mostly checklists and daylight planning. You learn fast that rural miles don't behave like city miles. A wrong turn can cost an hour. A dead battery can cost a day. I kept things old-fashioned, paper maps in the glove box, compass on the dash, spare water, and a habit of noting landmarks like I was still working before smartphones. If you prefer these quiet, real-style accounts, subscribe. I keep them as close to the truth as I can. That week, the county had been reporting a weak signal pocket that didn't make sense on our coverage model. It wasn't a total dead zone, more like a bruise, calls dropping at the same coordinates, data stalling, radio checks coming back muddy. On paper, it should have been clean. On the ground, it wasn't. The assignment was straightforward: verify the repeater chain and inspect the pole line that fed a small section of older town infrastructure. Not the current town center, the older section that had been bypassed years ago when they rerouted the highway. Most of the time, those checks are boring in the best way. You find a corroded connector, a sagging line, a misaligned antenna. You fix what you can, document what you can't, and you move on. The signal report, though, pointed me toward a gravel road that didn't match my GPS mapping. The app showed pasture where the road clearly existed. It wasn't a faint two-track either. It had fresh grading, a neat shoulder, and reflective markers posted at steady intervals like someone expected traffic at night. The entrance sat behind a line of cottonwoods along a county road, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. No sign, no street name, just gravel and those markers catching the sun. I pulled over, checked the coordinates from the work order against the device, and then against my paper map. The map didn't show it. The coordinates were close enough that it made sense. An old service road perhaps, one we hadn't updated in the system. It looked maintained, which is usually the deciding factor. Someone spends money on a road for a reason. I told myself I'd drive in just far enough to confirm it tied into the older section of town, log the line condition, and be back out before the afternoon light started to tilt. That's how you avoid trouble. Keep it clean, Keep it short. Don't let curiosity turn into an itinerary. The first thing I noticed was the mile markers. They were small, just reflective plates on posts, not official highway signage. The kind utilities used to reference segments. I passed one that read 3. A minute later, another 3. Then another. Same font. Same spacing. Same height from the ground, as if installed by the same crew on the same day. At first I assumed I'd missed the 4 because of a bend or a patch of brush. Then I passed 3, again with a slight nick on the corner, recognizable. The exact same plate. I slowed, craning my neck like that would change what the numbers said. I checked my odometer. It was advancing normally. Gravel ticked under the tires. Dust rose behind me. Everything about the drive behaved like a drive. Except the markers kept repeating the same number, like the road was resetting its own place in the world every few hundred yards. My radio, set to the company band, began to pick up static. Not constant, directional. When I faced forward into the road, it intensified into a sandpaper hiss. When I angled the vehicle slightly, as if to pull onto the shoulder, it softened. I rotated the handheld unit in my palm and watched the signal bars flutter. Terrain interference, I thought. Tree line. Low ground. Rural radio does that. Still, it was odd how specific it was. How the noise seemed to care which way the vehicle pointed, not where it was. A few minutes in, houses began to appear along the road. Not ruins. Not cabins swallowed by vines. Actual houses, intact, painted, with porch steps and curtains drawn. One had a swing on the front porch. Another had flower beds edged with pale stones. They sat back from the gravel as if there should have been driveways, but there weren't. No gravel spurs. No packed dirt paths. The grass between house and road was tall and unbroken. No tire tracks. No footpaths. No mailbox posts at the roadside. That's what caught me, no mailboxes. In rural areas, the mailbox is practically a flag of existence. Even abandoned places usually have the post still standing, leaning, like a tooth. Here there was nothing, no boxes, no numbers, no newspaper tubes. Just these quiet houses lined up like a neighborhood assembled for display. I told myself it was a private development, an old company town area, maybe, left out of the county's regular maintenance schedule. But the road surface contradicted that. It looked recently graded. The gravel was clean, the ruts shallow, the crown sharp. Maintenance without traffic. That's a strange expense. The sun, too, started to feel wrong. Not in a dramatic way, more like a timing issue. It was late summer, so the light should have been sliding steadily toward evening. But here, it seemed reluctant to move. Shadows lagged behind objects, as if they were being dragged. I noticed it on the reflective posts. The shadow angle didn't change the way it should over the minutes I drove. It's the kind of thing you only notice when you're used to watching daylight, because your job depends on it. I checked my clock. It had advanced. My phone showed the correct time, but the light outside didn't match the numbers. At one point, I passed a stand of trees where the gravel road curved left. The curve was gentle, nothing tricky. I followed it, and a minute later I saw the same stand of trees again, recognizable by a split trunk that leaned like a person listening. The same curve, the same set of reflective markers, the same 3 plate with the nicked corner. I had the distinct sensation of being efficient in the wrong direction, like walking briskly on a treadmill. My vehicle kept moving, but the place didn't change the way it should. The radio hiss sharpened whenever I pointed down the road. When I turned my head, listening with one ear like that would help, I realized the static had a pulse to it, subtle, irregular, like something trying to form a pattern and failing. Before it got any worse, I told myself to do what the job taught me. Stop, document, and correct course. The road was messing with my sense of distance. Fine. I'd take a breath, get a clean heading, and leave. If you enjoy slow-burn, realistic horror, the kind built from small wrong details, leave a like. I eased off the gas and let the vehicle roll. The gravel softened under the tires. Dust drifted forward and hung in the sunlight like pale smoke. I tried to turn around. That sounds simple. It should have been. But as I looked for a wide spot or a driveway to use, anything, I realized there were no practical turnouts. The shoulders were narrow. The ditches were shallow but present. The houses had yards but no access points. It was a road designed to be driven forward, not reversed. So I kept going, expecting the next bend to open into something. A junction. A wider patch. A service area. Instead, I reached the same gentle curve again. The same stand of trees. The same marker. The same repeating 3. That's when it clicked in a cold, professional way. I wasn't failing to navigate. The road was looping while presenting new scenery. It was feeding me variation, different houses, different fences, the suggestion of progress, without allowing a true change in position. I'd been driving long enough to know the feel of a loop. But this wasn't a simple circle. It was subtle, stitched together so cleanly that your mind would rather blame itself than blame the landscape. It was a trap made out of normal rural logic. And the most unsettling thought wasn't, "I'm lost." It was, "This is meant to keep you moving." The bus stop appeared without warning. A standard yellow sign on a metal post, slightly bent, swaying in the light wind. The kind that stands at the edge of a county road for decades. Beneath it, the grass was pressed down in a small semicircle as if children had stood there waiting. But there was no adjoining driveway, no footpath, no mailbox, no indication that any family lived within walking distance. Just those silent houses set back from the road like stage props. We keep records for everything. School districts keep records like they're sacred. Routes, stops, seasonal changes. I knew that because our infrastructure work often had to coordinate around buses. The work order mentioned nothing about a bus route. The county map didn't show a neighborhood here at all. I pulled over anyway. Not because I wanted to investigate, but because my brain needed something solid to prove I was still in a real place. I put the vehicle in park, hazards on, and stepped out with my phone to take a photo of the sign. Documentation is a comfort when things feel off. It's proof you didn't imagine it. The air smelled like sun-baked gravel and dry weeds. The wind was light, steady. The road behind me was empty. The road ahead was empty. The bus stop sign creaked faintly as it swayed. I raised my phone and framed the shot. The screen showed the sign, the road, and a pale slice of sky. In the reflection of my vehicle's window, dark glass catching the scene behind me, I saw figures standing near the sign. Several of them. They were motionless, spaced too evenly, as if placed with a measuring tape. Their proportions were wrong in a way my brain tried to correct. Too tall for the distance, too narrow, shoulders set at odd angles. They didn't look like people waiting. They looked like silhouettes pretending to be people, held upright by expectation. I froze with my phone still raised. I felt my posture tighten without my permission. My heart stayed steady, but my hands went slightly cold, the way they do when adrenaline arrives without panic. I turned my head slowly, because some part of me believed that quick movement would make whatever was happening become more real. The road was empty. No figures. No footprints in the grass. No sound of anyone moving away. Just the bus stop sign swaying, the pressed grass, and my own vehicle idling behind me. I looked back at the window reflection. For a moment, the figures were still there, faint in the angle of light. Then the glare shifted, and the reflection showed only me and the sign. When I looked up again, the bus stop was closer. Not by a step, by several yards. Close enough that it felt like it had slid toward me while I wasn't looking, like a stage element being moved between scenes. The pressed grass now nearly touched my front tire. The sign's shadow fell at a slightly different angle, not matching the sun's position. I didn't question it out loud. I didn't try to reason with it. I did the only sensible thing. I got back in my vehicle. As soon as I shut the door, the radio hiss surged, a sudden, aggressive static that filled the cab. My phone's GPS spun and recentered repeatedly, unable to decide where I was. The compass on my dash, the simple mechanical kind, trembled and then settled on a heading that didn't match what the phone insisted. I put the vehicle in drive and accelerated, not recklessly but with purpose. Gravel sprayed. The tires found traction. The road ahead did what it had been doing all along. It offered me a clean, forward path. I stopped listening to the GPS. I followed the compass. At the next bend, I didn't take the curve so much as force my direction through it, keeping my heading even when the road suggested otherwise. The sensation was strange, like steering against a current. The trees blurred at the edges. The sunlight flickered through leaves in an uneven rhythm, like frames missing from a film. Then abruptly, the gravel ended beneath my tires. The vehicle thumped onto asphalt. The radio cleared. The hiss dropped away so suddenly it felt like my ears popped. Ahead, the main highway stretched in both directions, busy enough that a passing truck made the whole car shudder with wake. I checked my mirrors. The gravel road entrance wasn't behind me. There was only a shallow ditch and a line of cottonwoods that looked familiar, but not arranged the same way. I glanced at the clock. Only minutes had passed. Not enough time to loop for as long as I had. Not enough time for the sun to have behaved the way it did in there. I pulled onto the shoulder and sat with my hands on the wheel until my grip loosened. The air conditioning felt too loud. The ordinary highway noise, tires, wind, engines, felt like a lifeline. I marked my location manually. I took a photo of a highway mile marker to anchor myself. I drank water even though I wasn't thirsty. Those are the things you do when your body wants to pretend it's in control. When I looked at my work order again, the weak signal report still pointed to the same coordinates. The road I'd driven didn't exist on my map, but my memory insisted it had been maintained, marked, and lined with houses that looked ready to host a life. I finished the rest of my assignments that day on autopilot. I didn't mention the gravel road to anyone. Not at first. There are stories you don't tell because once you do, you become the kind of person who tells those stories. That night, in a motel with decent Wi-Fi and thin curtains, I downloaded my log data and cross-checked the coordinates. According to official maps, the location of the gravel road sat in the middle of a river. Not near it, not adjacent. In it, the river on the map was a wide, slow bend, exactly where my device insisted the road began and looped. I pulled up satellite imagery. The water was there, dark and calm, with no sign of grading, no reflective posts, no road scar. Then I opened the photo I'd taken of the bus stop. The sign was clear, the pressed grass visible. But behind it, in the background, were buildings, faded, intact structures that looked like a small institutional cluster. A low brick building, a taller structure with boarded windows, something that might have been a gym or a community hall. They didn't match any county records. No property parcels, no school facilities, no permits. It was as if the camera had captured a neighborhood from a ledger that had been erased. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. The edges of the buildings weren't distorted the way reflections sometimes are. They were solid, real in the frame. I checked the window reflection on my vehicle. The glare was too bright. The figures weren't there. Or maybe they were, and the light had done me the favor of hiding them. I've driven plenty of rural roads that feel like they go nowhere. Old service routes, forgotten spurs, places the county doesn't bother updating because nobody complains. But this wasn't just an unmapped road. It behaved like an access point, a path maintained for traffic that no longer uses vehicles, lined with houses that weren't meant to receive mail, marked with mile numbers that refused to advance. It offered the shape of normal life, bus stops, neighborhoods, routine lighting, without the substance, like it was rehearsing the idea of community for something that doesn't live the way we do. Modern maps are confident. They insist on what exists. They smooth the world into navigable certainty. But after that day, I started believing there are routes they simply refuse to acknowledge. Not because they're outdated, but because they were never meant to be followed by the living. Some roads remain in place for those who travel differently, and if you find one by accident, the best thing you can do is keep your heading, keep your hands steady, and don't stop long enough to become part of the scenery. If this account lingered with you, share it with someone who likes grounded horror, and subscribe for the next one. There's always another quiet road that isn't on the map.